There's no question about it. South Los Angeles is different today than it was yesterday, than 10 years ago, or even 50 years ago. The people, the places, the pride. At different times, they can all contrast and even be incompatible with how we may feel about the region today. The secrets to South LA's dynamic history, rise and fall, and current state are all scattered across the region in buildings, journals, photographs, and people's stories. And hardly any of its history is easily accessible to anyone that wants to know more about it. In an effort to explore and capture a glimpse of the changing landscape of South Los Angeles, I've created this mini-series called South LA Then and Now, where I hope to materialize and document the former history of the region. Some of these stories may be funny, others sad, and a handful insightful. But all of them, I believe, are necessary in helping us understand how South LA got to this point and what direction the region will go moving forward. To kick off this series, I want to rewind to a story we revisited in September of 2023, the South Hoover Hospital. A former medical facility built by Dr. Morris Pilson, a Russian immigrant, who led a team of doctors and nurses who all aided thousands of patients in the community and helped deliver over 30,000 babies right on the corner of 57th and Hoover Streets. This incredible work happened over the course of 4 decades. And then, it ended. Years later, I've come across many people who still remember the larger-than-life personality of Dr. Pilson. But the medical facility where all of these stories have taken place is hardly even a shell of its former self. In fact, it's very difficult to even imagine this building was once a hospital without knowing about it. But while buildings are important when reflecting on history, the people who resided in them can sometimes lend a deeper story. Just recently, I met Dr. Pilson's daughter, Harriet, and her son, Bob, who sat down with me to share a glimpse into the life, journey, and family of Dr. Pilson. We talked about Dr. Pilson's story, the hospital, and the character of the neighborhood in the early 1940s and 50s, and so much more. This South LA Then and Now conversation with Harriet and Bob on the South Hoover Hospital has been broken up into 3 different episodes. In this first episode, we'll focus on the creation of the South Hoover Hospital with Dr. Pilson. Right now, we'll jump into near the start of our conversation, where we just learned Dr. Pilson immigrated from Russia, touching down on Ellis Island to pursue a new life in the United States. Yeah, Dr. Morris Pilson had an incredible story. So you talked about how he came from Russia and then ended up on Ellis Island. How did he end up in South Los Angeles? How did he go from the East Coast all the way to the West?
I will tell you, it's a silly story, and it's not that silly. When they left Kishinev, Russia, they went from Russia to Marseille, and then from Marseille, they went the whole family. There was 5 children, and the mother and the father, my grandparents, and they at Marseille they took the boat, and I used to have a picture of it, and I don't anymore. And they went to New York, to Ellis Island, and then they stayed in New York while my father and my Uncle Joe went to pharmacy school and became pharmacists. But my father wanted to go beyond that. So then my grandfather had asthma. And here's a silly story. He heard of a place that when he was in Kishinev that was called Ocean Park, Venice Beach, where there were Jewish community, and he could be by the sea so he could breathe. You know, he was he was an asthmatic, but he lived till 96, and so he was able to breathe there. That was a silly part about it. You know, you don't go across the world to find this place. So then they ended, the family ended, well, I guess my part of the family was they lived closer in South LA, but it was like 30th Street, 31st Street, something like that. where there was apartment houses, and some of my aunts had apartments in there, and he wanted to go to school, my father, all the time. So he went to USC, and he got that type of degree. Then he went to UCLA.
Because he's told me this firsthand. I said, gee, that was very, ambitious of you to try and apply to these schools. And he goes, yeah, but he said it was so clear to me and easy for me because I couldn't believe, he said, I couldn't believe that if you were a Jew, you were allowed to go to these fantastic top level universities just for applying and working hard and getting good grades. And you can enroll in those schools. He said, in Russia, the finest universities, we were banned from that. So to him, it was just like a big candy store. He says, all I have to do is learn English and we need to want to make a living. And him and his brother became pharmacists first. But they went to these fantastic universities that were located in Los Angeles, and they weren't restricted from it. So this is a very important part of the story, is overcoming restrictions from Russia and even here in the United States, which to this day, as you know, is not fully recovered from restrictions. Okay, but that was what he loved about everything. It's what he loved about that location.
I want to interrupt you.
Yes, go ahead.
I want to tell you that my Uncle Joe and my father both had pharmacies in South LA. And I'll tell you where they were. Okay, one was on the corner of 58th and Hoover. That they had that one together. There was a brick building, I remember, with a mailbox in front of it. That's all I can remember. But then when my father became a doctor, my Uncle Joe didn't want to become a doctor. He just wanted to be who he was. And he opened up a drugstore on 68th in Vermont. And he had that drugstore, which he lived in the back of the store. And so his name was Joseph Pilson.
I'm here to learn. I find this so fascinating. Like, it's like you take something that and then you're looking at it from a completely different angle. I think it's just fascinating listening from you both. So this hospital, do I remember, Harriet, that you saying that he either built or planned the hospital?
He built it.
Can you talk a bit more about that?
He built it. I remember the name of the architect was Max Zimmer. Zimmer. I don't know how I remember Max Zimmer, but he was very important in our family because my father bought the land. He bought all these lots.
Yeah, but of course, as you know, the hospital is a streamlined modern, which was very popular at the time. They've since in the photos that you have over the years, people have like plastered over the brick, and I have a couple very nice pictures of it, freshly built, with my grandfather standing in front of it. And I have a picture of the hospitals, some of the main hospital staff as well. When I went to USC myself, I would go and visit them at the hospital. And I was shocked to see my grandfather in a white doctor's outfit, okay, because I was used to just see him for Friday night dinner, okay, when I was a little kid. But when, it was a very beautiful building. Now it's kind of there's boards and it's got a lot of wear and tear now, but
it's definitely still standing. Let's talk about when you used to visit. What do you remember seeing? How did it feel to be in the hospital?
Well, I was always very proud that my grandfather was a doctor and delivering all these babies, and of course was a holdout there in the neighborhood because he loved taking care of the neighborhood. He didn't care about the changing demographics or whatever. He had a great, what you call a cookie cutter pattern, like provide good service, give it to folks at a price they could afford, because money wasn't the most important thing. Certainly he was successful, in what he did, and was, able to have investments and, help the family, thrive. We were privileged in that regard. In many regards, we were privileged, but it was a lot to do with his hard work. And I believe, do you remember the year that he moved out of the home on 57th? He was 86 years old. He practiced there at that hospital till he was 86 years old. And he refused to move out of his house on 57th Street, even though it was treacherous. I mean, he at times. I mean,
Well, they were robbed, and
he brushed that off. He got robbed a couple times, and he didn't care.
One time by gunpoint.
At gunpoint, yeah. But and also one of their beloved nurses was shot in an early drive-by.
Yeah.
That was in the 1970s,
yeah,
right?
Her name was Betty. Yeah.
Betty, yes.
Yeah, his office nurse said she was waiting there was a streetcar on Hoover, and she walked across the street to wait for the streetcar, and the drive-by idiot shot her.
They were in real mourning over that. And I remember being so impressed as a young child. I mean, scared impressed, but yet none of that deterred him. And, he was modest in his, even though he had such a nice house down the street, you couldn't really see that it was such a big, nice house. But they lived modestly. He didn't like it. He was a big man. He didn't like to walk that far. And I always got cracked up because his house was a couple blocks down. And he would get in his car and drive to the office.
Well, I got to tell you a funny anecdote about the day that I finally got them out of there. We had property in Beverly Hills, and there was what was there? How did we get him? Well, I'll tell you how I got him out of there. Mom said, he's not going to move. He's not going to move. I said, you take him to the office, and I'm going to send the movers in there and take his bed away. And that's what I did.
Yeah, well,
and he couldn't come home and sleep in his bed.
My mother's unconventional, but anyway, he was a very modest guy. He never would get a car fancier than a standard Chevy Nova. And when a Nova got old, he would get the next model Chevy Nova. We just blend in. He wasn't flashy at all. Not like my mother. Okay, it was very flashy.
I'm the big flash.
Yeah, well, actually, my father, who's not, my father was the flashiest. Okay, so, but be that as it may, that's not what we're talking about today. Okay, we're talking about South Hoover and my grandfather, the doctor in the community, which he was such a big part of, and he loved so much, and really was like he wouldn't go until they forced him, at 86 years old. To finally, stop practicing.